A flight attendant noticed a 9-year-old girl traveling alone, trembling whenever the man next to her spoke. When the attendant offered the girl a coloring book, the message the child wrote made the captain call 911 immediately. The Atlanta International Terminal buzzed with the familiar symphony of airport chaos. Rollaway suitcases clicking across polished floors, garbled announcements echoing through the vaulted ceilings, and hundreds of travelers rushing in practice choreography toward their destinations. Among them stood Rebecca Parker, her hands resting protectively on her daughter's small shoulders. "You've got your book?" Rebecca asked, adjusting the purple backpack strapped to her daughter's narrow frame. "And Mr. Whiskers?" She reached into the side pocket to check for the well-worn stuffed cat that had accompanied Emily on every journey since she was 4. Emily nodded without speaking, her hazel eyes fixed on the United Airlines check-in counter ahead. At 9 years old, she carried herself with a surprising composure that sometimes made Rebecca forget how young she truly was. Today, that composure appeared more brittle than usual. "It's just like last time, sweetie," Rebecca said, attempting to lighten the mood. 3 hours on the plane, and Daddy will be waiting when you land. You'll have pancakes at that place you love tomorrow morning." Emily's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Blueberry pancakes," she corrected softly. Rebecca suppressed a sigh. These monthly visits had been part of their routine since the divorce was finalized 6 months ago, but they weren't getting any easier. Michael's job opportunity in Boston couldn't have come at a worse time, just as their marriage was crumbling under the weight of years of quiet resentment and growing distance. The custody arrangement had been amicable on paper. Emily would live with Rebecca in Atlanta where her school and friends were, while Michael would have 1 weekend a month plus holidays. The reality was more complicated. Emily returned from these visits increasingly withdrawn, caught in the unspoken tension between two parents trying their best not to speak ill of each other. "Next customer, please," called the airline representative, a woman with a neat bun and professional smile. Rebecca guided Emily forward. "Good morning. My daughter is traveling as an unaccompanied minor to Boston. Flight 2487. The representative's demeanor shifted immediately to a warmer, more attentive stance. "Well, hello there," she said, looking directly at Emily. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emily Parker," she replied, her voice barely audible above the terminal noise. "Perfect. I have you right here in our system." The representative typed efficiently. "This is your 3rd time flying with us. I see. You're practically an expert now." Emily didn't respond. She gripped the straps of her backpack and leaned almost imperceptibly against her mother's side. "I'll need to see identification for both of you," the representative continued, maintaining her cheerful tone despite Emily's reticence. "And I'll have you fill out these forms, Miss Parker." Rebecca presented their IDs and began filling out the documentation, familiar with the process by now. Emergency contact information, details of who would meet Emily in Boston, Michael Parker, her father, with matching identification, food allergies, none, and special requirements, also none. "Looks like we're all set," the representative said after checking the forms. She printed a special badge that she slipped into a United Airlines lanyard. "This is your special pass, Emily. It lets everyone know you're an important traveler with us today." As the representative placed the lanyard around Emily's neck, Rebecca noticed her daughter's shoulders tense. She'd never been comfortable with strangers in her personal space. "Our unaccompanied minor coordinator will be here in just a moment to escort you through security and to your gate," the representative explained. "You'll be one of the first to board the plane, and the flight attendants will take special care of you during the flight." The coordinator, a young man named Tyler with a tablet and a perpetual smile, arrived promptly. Rebecca knelt down to Emily's level, brushing a strand of chestnut hair behind her daughter's ear. "I love you to the moon," Rebecca said, completing their ritual. "And back twice," Emily finished, allowing herself to be folded into a tight hug. "Call me as soon as you land. Okay?" Rebecca said, feeling the familiar ache in her chest. "And tell Daddy I said hello." Emily nodded, her small hand clutching Mr. Whiskers more tightly. "I'll take good care of her," Tyler assured Rebecca. "We'll get some lunch before the flight if she's hungry." and I'll personally introduce her to the flight attendants. Rebecca stood, forcing herself to smile. Thank you. She watched as Emily walked away with Tyler, her purple backpack bouncing slightly with each step. At the security checkpoint, Emily turned and gave a small wave. Rebecca waved back, maintaining her smile until her daughter disappeared from view. Only then did she allow her expression to fall, feeling the familiar weight of guilt and uncertainty settle in her stomach. Was this arrangement truly best for Emily? The family court mediator had seemed to think so. Children are resilient, she'd said. The consistency of the schedule is what matters. But the growing quietness in her daughter worried Rebecca. Each transition seemed to steal a little more of her light. Flight attendant Natalie Rodriguez checked her appearance in the crew lavatory mirror, straightening her navy scarf and tucking a stray strand of dark hair back into her neat bun. 15 years with United had taught her that presentation wasn't just about company policy. It was about authority. Passengers responded to the uniform, to the confidence it projected. Today, she'd need every ounce of that authority to manage the full flight to Boston. She rejoined the cabin preparation, mentally reviewing the passenger manifest. Columbus Day weekend meant a higher-than-usual number of families. They also had 3 unaccompanied minors on this flight, always a priority for her attention. Pre-boarding will begin in 5 minutes, announced her colleague, Damon, at the gate. Natalie positioned herself near the jet bridge entrance, clipboard in hand, ready to greet the first passengers, those needing special assistance and, of course, the UMs. Right on cue, Tyler from Passenger Services appeared escorting a young girl with a United Airlines lanyard around her neck. "This is Emily Parker," Tyler said, handing Natalie the documentation. "She's headed to Boston to visit her dad. Flight number 3 as a so she's practically a professional." Natalie smiled warmly at the girl, immediately noting her reserved demeanor. After 15 years, she'd developed an almost instinctual categorization of the unaccompanied minors who passed through her care. There were the excited ones, bouncing with the adventure of it all. The nervous ones, wide-eyed and seeking reassurance. And occasionally the withdrawn ones like Emily, who carried a weight too heavy for their years. "Hello, Emily," Natalie said, bending slightly to meet the girl's eyes. "I'm Natalie, and I'll be taking care of you on our flight today. Do you have any questions before we board?" Emily shook her head, eyes downcast. "She's been pretty quiet today," Tyler commented. "But her mom said that's normal for her." Natalie nodded, accepting the clipboard with Emily's information. "Well, it's nice to meet you, Emily. We're going to board you first so you can get comfortable. Your seat is 14C, which is an aisle seat, just how I like it." Emily's eyes briefly met Natalie's, revealing a flash of intelligence and assessment that belied her young age. She was evaluating whether Natalie was someone who spoke to children with genuine respect or with that artificial, high-pitched enthusiasm some adults defaulted to. Natalie kept her expression warm but not exaggerated, earning the slightest relaxation in the girl's posture. "Thank you," Emily said softly. "You're welcome to board now," Natalie said, guiding her toward the jet bridge. "I'll check on you once everyone's settled." Emily walked with the careful deliberation of a child determined to appear grown up. Natalie watched her go, then checked her manifest again. Seat 14B was occupied by Jerome Caldwell, and 14A by Alinda McPherson. She made a mental note to keep an eye on their interactions with Emily, as she did with all UMs. Most passengers were understanding about sitting next to children traveling alone, but occasionally some made their annoyance known, adding unnecessary stress to already vulnerable young travelers. The boarding process proceeded with its usual controlled chaos. Natalie greeted passengers, directed them to their seats, and helped stow unwieldy carry-ons. Through it all, she maintained a periodic visual check on 14C. Emily had settled in with a book, her stuffed cat peeking out from her backpack in the space by her feet. Natalie was assisting an elderly passenger when she noticed a well-dressed man in his 40s approach row 14. He checked his boarding pass, stowed his sleek carry-on in the overhead compartment, and took the middle seat beside Emily. Natalie observed as he gave the girl a friendly smile. Emily responded with a polite but reserved nod before returning to her book. Nothing unusual in that interaction, Natalie thought, though something about the man's demeanor triggered a subtle note of professional vigilance. Perhaps it was the way his eyes lingered on Emily a moment too long, or how his smile seemed practiced rather than natural. After 15 years in the air, Natalie had learned to trust these small, intuitive flags, even when she couldn't immediately articulate why they were raised. By the time the boarding door closed, the flight was at full capacity. Linda McPherson, the window seat passenger for row 14, had arrived last. A harried-looking businesswoman who immediately donned noise-canceling headphones and turned toward the window, creating a clear boundary between herself and her seat companions. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard United Airlines Flight 2487 to Boston. Damon began the safety announcements as the aircraft pushed back from the gate. Natalie moved through the cabin, checking seatbelts and ensuring compliance with takeoff procedures. When she reached row 14, she paused. "All set here?" she asked, addressing all three passengers but focusing on Emily. "We're good," the man in 14B answered with an easy smile. He gestured toward Emily. "Just getting acquainted with my young friend here." Something in his phrasing caught Natalie's attention. It wasn't unusual for adults to attempt friendly conversation with children seated beside them, but "my young friend" carried a presumption of familiarity that seemed at odds with Emily's clearly reserved nature. "Is your seatbelt comfortable, Emily?" Natalie asked directly, deliberately using the girl's name to establish her status as a known passenger under the airline's care. Emily nodded, her small hands folded tightly in her lap. "Perfect," Natalie said. "If you need anything during the flight, just press this button here." She indicated the call button above Emily's seat. "I'll come check on you after takeoff." The man in 14B, Jerome Caldwell, according to the manifest, watched this exchange with an expression Natalie couldn't quite read. Interest, assessment, whatever it was, it prolonged that sense of professional unease. "I'll keep an eye on her too," he offered, his tone suggesting helpfulness. "I've got a daughter about her age." "How thoughtful," Natalie replied with practiced courtesy. "But as an unaccompanied minor, Emily is under our direct care during the flight." Something flickered in Jerome's eyes, perhaps disappointment at the clear establishment of boundaries, before his expression returned to its pleasant default. "Of course." As the aircraft accelerated down the runway, Natalie secured herself in the jump seat, running through her mental checklist of passengers requiring special attention. Emily Parker remained at the top of that list, though Natalie couldn't have articulated exactly why. There was nothing overtly concerning about the situation, just the accumulation of small details that her experienced intuition had flagged. Emily's unusual quietness, even for a reserved child, Jerome Caldwell's overly familiar manner, and the almost imperceptible tension in Emily's posture whenever he spoke. Probably nothing, Natalie thought as the plane lifted into the air. But she'd check again once they reached cruising altitude. With unaccompanied minors, she always preferred to err on the side of caution. The sensation of takeoff still fascinated Emily, even on her third flight. The powerful push against her seat, the strange feeling in her stomach as the plane left the ground, the houses and cars below shrinking until they looked like toys. Under different circumstances, she might have enjoyed the experience. Today, however, her attention was divided between the window view and the man sitting beside her. He'd introduced himself as Jerome when he first sat down, a name that sounded like something from an old movie. He wore an expensive-looking suit and had the kind of smile adults used when they were trying to seem nice but weren't really interested in what you had to say. At first, Emily had been relieved when he took out his phone and focused on it after their brief introduction. The businesswoman by the window had headphones on and hadn't even looked at Emily, which was perfectly fine with her. Emily had planned to read her book for most of the flight, just as she had on her previous trips to visit Dad. But shortly after takeoff, Jerome had put his phone away and turned toward her. "So, Emily," he said, his voice lowered as if sharing a secret, "I couldn't help noticing your special lanyard. Are you flying to Boston by yourself?" Emily nodded, remembering her mother's instructions about being polite but not overly chatty with strangers. The flight attendant, Natalie, had seemed nice, And Emily appreciated how she'd spoken to her directly instead of talking over her head like many adults did. "That's very brave," Jerome continued. "I bet your parents are proud. Is someone meeting you in Boston?" "My dad," Emily answered, keeping her response minimal. Jerome's face brightened with what looked like genuine interest. "What a coincidence. I think I might know your father. What's his name?" Emily hesitated. Her mother had always taught her not to share personal information with strangers, but this seemed like a harmless question. "Michael Parker," she said finally. Jerome's eyebrows rose. "Michael Parker? Does he work at Bradenton Financial?" Emily felt a small jolt of surprise. "Yes," she said, her curiosity overcoming her caution. "Do you really know him?" "I knew it," Jerome said, looking pleased. "We've worked on several projects together. He talks about you all the time, his brilliant daughter who loves to read." "He didn't mention you were visiting this weekend, though." Emily clutched her book a little tighter. It was strange that her father hadn't mentioned knowing Jerome, especially if they worked together. Dad always told her about his colleagues, sometimes showing her pictures from office events. "He's picking me up at the airport," she said, feeling a growing unease she couldn't quite explain. "That's perfect," Jerome replied. "Maybe I'll say hello to him there. He's been helping me with a big presentation for Monday, so I have some questions for him anyway." He leaned slightly closer, his cologne smelling sharp and unfamiliar. "It must be hard, having your parents live in different cities." Emily nodded automatically, though she didn't want to discuss her parents with this stranger. She opened her book, hoping he would recognize her desire to read rather than talk. Jerome seemed to take the hint, returning to his phone for a while. Emily tried to focus on her book, but the words blurred together as her thoughts raced. Why didn't Dad ever mention Jerome? He talked about his coworkers all the time. And why did Jerome seem so interested in her? Most adults on her previous flights had barely acknowledged her presence after the initial hello. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and flight attendants began moving through the cabin. Emily caught sight of Natalie a few rows ahead, serving drinks to passengers. Jerome's phone dinged with a message. When he checked it, his expression changed subtly. A tightening around his eyes, a slight downturn of his mouth. He typed a quick response before turning back to Emily. "Your dad just messaged me," he said casually. "He's running a little late and asked if I could help you get your luggage when we land. He'll meet us at the baggage claim." Emily's stomach tightened with the first real flicker of fear. That couldn't be right. Dad was always early to pick her up, waiting anxiously at the gate where the airline staff would check his ID before releasing her to his care. And she didn't have any checked luggage, just her backpack with clothes for the weekend. "I don't have luggage," she said, her voice sounding smaller than she intended. "And Dad said he'd meet me at the gate." Something in Jerome's expression hardened for an instant before smoothing into concern. "Oh, he must have forgotten to update you. He sent me this message just now." He tilted his phone screen toward her, but angled it so she couldn't clearly see the supposed message. Emily's unease crystallized into concrete fear. She knew with sudden clarity that Jerome was lying. He didn't know her father. The realization sent a cold wave through her body. "I need to use the bathroom," she said abruptly, unbuckling her seatbelt. Jerome stood to let her out, his movements fluid and accommodating. "Of course. Do you want me to show you where it is?" "No, thank you," Emily said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know where it is." As she walked toward the rear lavatory, Emily felt Jerome's eyes following her. Her legs seemed to move automatically while her mind raced. What should she do? The flight attendant, Natalie, had seemed kind, but would she believe a 9-year-old's suspicions over a well-dressed business traveler's explanations? The lavatory was occupied, so Emily stood in the small waiting area, trying to look calm while internally counting her options. She could tell Natalie her concerns, but what exactly would she say? That the man sitting next to her was creepy? That she thought he was lying about knowing her dad? It all sounded childish and unsubstantiated when she tried to put it into words. The lavatory door opened, and an elderly woman emerged. Emily slipped inside, locked the door, and leaned against it, finally alone with her racing thoughts. She used the facilities quickly, then stood at the tiny sink, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her face looked the same as always, straight brown hair cut in a practical bob, hazel eyes, a light sprinkle of freckles across her nose. But she felt fundamentally different. Fear had transformed her. Emily took several deep breaths, remembering what her school counselor had taught during their stranger danger assembly. If you feel unsafe, find an adult you trust. The flight attendants were responsible for her safety. Natalie had specifically said to use the call button if she needed anything. With renewed determination, Emily washed her hands, dried them, and exited the lavatory. As she walked back to her seat, she noticed Natalie in the galley area, preparing the beverage service. Their eyes met briefly, and Natalie gave her a reassuring smile. Emily returned to row 14, where Jerome stood to let her back into her seat. As she settled in, he leaned closer. "I was getting worried about you," he said, his voice carrying a note of possession that made her skin crawl. "Listen, I've been thinking, since we're both meeting your dad, maybe we should exchange phone numbers. That way, if he's running late, we can coordinate." Emily froze, her mind frantically searching for an appropriate response. Before she could formulate one, Natalie appeared beside their row with the beverage cart. "What can I get for you folks?" she asked, her professional smile firmly in place. "I'll have a sparkling water, no ice," Jerome replied smoothly. Natalie nodded and turned to Emily, her expression warming. "And for you, Emily? We have apple juice, orange juice, water." "Apple juice, please," Emily said, her voice barely audible. As Natalie poured the juice into a plastic cup, Emily noticed her watching Jerome with a careful, assessing gaze. When she handed Emily the cup, Natalie's smile remained fixed, but her eyes conveyed a subtle message of attentiveness. "Thank you," Emily murmured, taking the cup with both hands to prevent it from spilling. To her horror, she noticed her fingers were trembling visibly. Natalie noticed it too. Her gaze lingered on Emily's hands, then flicked briefly to Jerome before returning to Emily's face. "Everything all right, sweetie?" Natalie asked, her tone casual but her eyes intent. Emily nodded quickly, unable to voice her growing fear with Jerome sitting beside her. "She's a little nervous about flying," Jerome interjected with a sympathetic smile. "I've been keeping her company, telling her about my own daughter who's about her age." Natalie acknowledged his comment with a professional nod, but kept her attention on Emily. "Well, we're about halfway to Boston now. Not much longer. I'll check on you again soon." As Natalie moved on with the beverage service, Emily sipped her apple juice, trying to organize her thoughts. The flight attendant had clearly noticed something was wrong, but Emily hadn't found a way to communicate her concerns. She needed a plan. Jerome seemed to sense her withdrawal and shifted tactics, returning to his phone and giving her space. But occasionally, Emily caught him watching her from the corner of his eye, evaluating, calculating. The fear in her stomach hardened into a cold knot. Emily realized with growing clarity that she was in danger. Not immediate physical danger, they were, after all, on a crowded airplane, but something more insidious. Jerome was building some kind of plan that involved her, using lies and manipulation to establish a connection that didn't exist. And he would be with her when they landed in Boston, potentially interfering with the airline's procedures for releasing her to her father. As these thoughts crystallized, Emily made a decision. When Natalie returned, she would find a way to communicate her fear, even if it made her look foolish, even if Jerome became angry, because the alternative, doing nothing, suddenly seemed far more frightening than any potential embarrassment. Emily Parker stared straight ahead, apple juice clutched in her trembling hands, and waited for her opportunity. Natalie Rodriguez had developed a sixth sense about trouble over her 15 years as a flight attendant. It wasn't something United Airlines had trained her for specifically, but rather an intuition honed through thousands of flights and countless passenger interactions. That intuition was now humming like a live wire as she collected empty cups from rows 12 and 13, moving steadily toward Emily Parker and the man seated beside her. When she'd first noticed Emily's trembling hands, Natalie had mentally flagged the situation for closer monitoring. Unaccompanied minors often experienced anxiety, of course. Flying alone was intimidating even for the most confident children. But there was something different about Emily's demeanor. The girl wasn't displaying the typical signs of flight anxiety. No white-knuckled grip during turbulence. No wide-eyed watching of the cabin crew for reassurance. Instead, her fear seemed focused on her immediate surroundings, specifically on Jerome Caldwell. Natalie reached row 14 and smiled professionally. "May I take your cups?" Jerome handed over his empty sparkling water. "Thank you. Perhaps a coffee when you have a moment." "Of course," Natalie replied, noting how he positioned himself as the row's spokesperson, subtly inserting himself between her and Emily. Emily's apple juice was barely touched, the ice mostly melted. The girl looked up at Natalie with an intensity that communicated more than words could. There was a plea in those hazel eyes, a desperate attempt to convey something she couldn't say aloud. "Would you like a refill, Emily?" Natalie asked, deliberately using the girl's name again, establishing her as an individual under the airline's protection. Emily shook her head, still clutching the cup with both hands. "You should finish your juice," Jerome said, his tone casual but carrying an undertone of instruction. "It's important to stay hydrated on flights." The girl took a small, obligatory sip, her eyes never leaving Natalie's face. "Actually," Natalie said, making a quick decision, "I have some coloring books and crayons for our younger passengers. Would you like one, Emily? It might help pass the time." A flicker of interest crossed Emily's face. "Yes, please. I'll bring it right over," Natalie promised, taking the cups and moving on to the next row. In the galley, Natalie quickly disposed of the trash and pulled out the children's activity pack from the supply drawer. As she did, Damon approached to refill the coffee carafe. "Everything okay?" he asked, noting her expression. "You've got your trouble face on." Natalie hesitated. Her concerns about Jerome and Emily were still nebulous, based on body language and intuition rather than concrete evidence. Damon was relatively new, and she didn't want to seem alarmist. "Just keeping an eye on our in 14C, she said. "Something feels off with the passenger next to her." Damon glanced down the aisle. "The guy in the suit? He looks harmless enough." "Probably is," Natalie conceded. "But I'm going to check on her more frequently than usual." "You're the whisperer," Damon said with a shrug, referring to Natalie's well-known affinity for looking after the airline's youngest solo travelers. "Trust your gut." Natalie returned to row 14 with the activity pack and a fresh coffee for Jerome. He accepted it with a charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Here you are, Emily," Natalie said, handing over the colorful packet. "There's a maze, some word searches, and plenty of blank pages for drawing." Emily took the packet with visible gratitude. "Thank you. I'll be back to check on you," Natalie promised. She directed her next words to Jerome, firmly but professionally. "Sir, as part of our unaccompanied minor program, I'll be stopping by regularly. Please let me know if either of you needs anything." Jerome nodded, his expression perfectly pleasant. "Of course, though I assure you we're getting along famously. Emily's been telling me all about her father in Boston. Quite the coincidence that we have a mutual connection." The statement was clearly meant to establish his legitimacy, but something in Emily's face, a barely perceptible flinch, set off another warning bell in Natalie's mind. "How nice," she responded neutrally before continuing with her service duties. As she moved through the cabin, Natalie mentally reviewed United's unaccompanied minor procedures. The airline had strict protocols. Emily would be escorted off the plane last, directly to her father, whose identification would be verified against the authorized pickup form. No passenger, regardless of claimed connection, could interfere with that process. Yet Natalie couldn't shake her growing unease. Whatever was happening in row 14 wouldn't be resolved by standard procedures alone. She needed to create an opportunity to speak with Emily privately. Emily stared at the coloring book in her lap, her mind racing. The flight attendant, Natalie, had given her paper she could write on. A way to communicate without speaking, without Jerome hearing. She opened the activity packet with shaking fingers, flipping past the maze and word search to a blank drawing page. Now she just needed a chance to write her message. But how? Jerome was right beside her, would see anything she wrote. As if sensing her thoughts, Jerome leaned closer, his shoulder pressing against hers as he examined the activity book. "Those are nice," he commented. "My daughter loves to color too. She's 8, just a bit younger than you." Emily nodded non-committally, clutching the crayon packet tightly. His mention of a daughter didn't comfort her. It only made her more confused and frightened. Was he really a father? How could someone with a child of their own do whatever it was he was doing? "I need to use the restroom again," Jerome announced, setting his coffee in the seat pocket. "Hold my place, will you?" Emily quickly moved her legs to allow him into the aisle, relief washing over her. This was her chance. But she had to be quick. The lavatory was only a short distance away. As soon as Jerome disappeared toward the rear of the plane, Emily frantically opened the crayon packet. She selected a blue crayon and began writing on one corner of the blank page, pressing hard to make the words clear. "He says he knows my dad. He doesn't. Help me please. He keeps touching my hand." She had just finished writing when she spotted Jerome emerging from the lavatory. Quickly, she flipped to the maze page and began tracing the path with her crayon, heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone around her could hear it. Jerome slid back into his seat. "Making progress on the maze?" he asked casually. Emily nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. "Good girl," he murmured, the praise sending a chill down her spine. He reached over and patted her hand, letting his fingers linger on hers a moment too long. Emily pretended to focus on the maze, counting the seconds until Natalie would return. The message was written. Now she just needed a chance to show it to someone who could help. The memory of Emily's frightened eyes haunted Natalie as she completed the beverage service. She'd attended United's enhanced customer service training just 3 months ago, which had included a module on recognizing signs of human trafficking and child endangerment. The training had emphasized that flight attendants were uniquely positioned to identify potential victims. People in distress often had nowhere to turn for help at 30,000 feet. The instructor's words echoed in her mind. "Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is." Natalie prepared a small snack tray, an excuse to check on Emily again. As she approached row 14, she observed Jerome leaning close to Emily, whispering something that made the girl shrink further into her seat. When he noticed Natalie approaching, he straightened immediately, his demeanor shifting like a light switch being flipped. "Pretzel mix," Natalie offered, extending the snack basket. Jerome took a packet with a smile. "Thank you." Emily reached for a packet as well, the coloring book balanced on her lap. As she selected a pretzel mix, she deliberately let the book tilt toward Natalie, flipping back a page to reveal blue crayon writing in the corner. Natalie's training kicked in immediately. Without changing her expression, she noted the written message. "He says he knows my dad. He doesn't. Help me please. He keeps touching my hand." Her blood ran cold, but years of professional composure kept her face neutral. She needed to remove Emily from this situation without alerting Jerome to their suspicions. A direct approach could escalate the situation or cause him to establish a stronger story. "Emily," Natalie said casually, "I just remembered we have a special program for our young travelers today. Would you like to see the flight deck before we begin our descent to Boston? The pilots love meeting our unaccompanied minors." Emily's eyes widened with understanding. "Yes, please," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all flight. Jerome frowned slightly. "Is that standard procedure? I wouldn't want to interrupt her trip right when we've been getting along so well." The possessive undertone in his voice confirmed Natalie's worst suspicions. "It's a special opportunity we offer to our unaccompanied minors," Natalie explained smoothly. "Completely optional, of course, but most children find it quite exciting." "I want to go," Emily said firmly, already reaching for her seatbelt buckle. Jerome's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly before he forced a smile. "Well, if it's part of the program, though I'll miss my little friend here." Natalie maintained her professional demeanor. "I'll have her back before landing preparations begin." Can I bring you anything else while she's gone? Jerome declined with a tight smile, and Natalie escorted Emily toward the front of the plane, placing a protective hand lightly on the girl's shoulder. She could feel Emily trembling beneath her touch. Once they were safely in the forward galley, out of Jerome's line of sight, Natalie knelt to Emily's level. "You're safe now," she said quietly. "Can you tell me what's happening?" Emily's composure cracked. Her lower lip trembled as tears welled in her eyes. "He keeps saying he knows my dad, but he doesn't. He's lying. And he said Dad texted him to meet me at baggage claim, but I don't have any bags, and Dad always meets me at the gate." "You did exactly the right thing," Natalie assured her, squeezing her hand gently. "Can I see the note you wrote again?" Emily retrieved the coloring book from under her arm and opened it to the page with her message. Natalie read it again carefully. "Has he touched you anywhere else besides your hand?" Natalie asked gently. Emily shook her head. "No, but he sits really close and he smells weird and—" She paused, struggling to articulate what had frightened her. "He knows things about my dad that he shouldn't, like where he works, and he keeps making up stories." Natalie nodded, her concern deepening. Emily's instincts were remarkably sharp for a 9-year-old. She had identified manipulation tactics that many adults might have overlooked. "I'm going to take care of this," Natalie promised. "You don't have to go back to that seat if you don't want to." "I don't want to," Emily whispered, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Then you won't," Natalie said firmly. "Let me show you where you'll stay for the rest of the flight." She guided Emily to the jump seat in the forward galley, where flight attendants sat during takeoff and landing. "You can color here while I speak with the captain. Is that okay?" Emily nodded, visibly relieved to be away from Jerome. Natalie knocked on the flight deck door, using the secure entry procedure. When the door opened, Captain Rivera looked up from his instruments. "What's up, Natalie?" he asked, immediately noting her serious expression. "We have a situation with an unaccompanied minor," she explained quietly, ensuring Emily couldn't overhear. "I believe the male passenger seated next to her may have harmful intentions. The child has expressed fear and provided a written note indicating he's lying about knowing her father and has been touching her inappropriately." Captain Rivera's expression hardened. "Do we need to divert?" "I don't think that's necessary yet," Natalie replied. "She's safe with me now, and we're only about 40 minutes from Boston. But we should notify authorities to meet the flight, and I'd like permission to implement our child protection protocol." "Absolutely," the captain agreed without hesitation. "I'll contact air traffic control and have them arrange for law enforcement at our arrival gate. Keep the child with you for the duration of the flight." "Thank you, sir." "And Natalie," the captain added, "good catch." Back in the galley, Natalie found Emily carefully coloring a picture of a cat that bore a striking resemblance to the stuffed animal peeking out of her backpack. "That's a wonderful drawing," Natalie commented, sitting beside her. "Is that your cat?" "Mr. Whiskers," Emily confirmed, adding Whiskers to the drawing with careful strokes. "He goes everywhere with me." "Well, Mr. Whiskers is lucky to have such a brave owner," Natalie said gently. "The captain is making arrangements so that when we land, you'll be safely reunited with your dad. You won't have to worry about that man anymore." Emily's shoulders relaxed slightly. "He won't be able to follow us?" "No," Natalie assured her. "There will be people at the airport to make sure of that." She hesitated, then added, "Emily, I need to ask you a few more questions about Jerome. Is that okay?" The girl nodded, her crayon pausing on the page. "Did he tell you his last name?" "Caldwell," Emily replied. "Jerome Caldwell. He said he works with my dad at Bradenton Financial." Natalie made a mental note. "And what's your father's name?" "Michael Parker." "Has Jerome shown you any messages that he says are from your dad?" Emily shook her head. "He tried to show me his phone, but he held it at an angle, so I couldn't really see it." Smart girl, Natalie thought. Emily had picked up on a classic deception tactic. "You've been incredibly helpful," Natalie told her, "and very brave. Not many 9-year-olds would have handled this situation so well." I was really scared, Emily admitted, setting down her crayon. I still am. That's completely normal, Natalie assured her. Being scared doesn't mean you weren't brave. It actually makes you braver, because you asked for help even though you were frightened. Emily considered this, then nodded slowly. My dad says that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid. Your dad sounds like a wise man, Natalie said with a gentle smile. I'm looking forward to meeting him in Boston. He always wears a blue baseball cap when he picks me up, Emily volunteered, so I can spot him easily in the crowd. And he gives the best hugs. The simple, heartfelt description of Michael Parker contrasted sharply with the calculated manipulation of Jerome Caldwell. Natalie felt a renewed surge of protectiveness toward this perceptive, vulnerable child. I need to brief my colleagues about our plan, Natalie explained. Would you like to stay here and continue coloring? Or would you prefer to come with me? I'll stay with you, Emily decided, quickly gathering her coloring materials. Natalie understood the girl's reluctance to be alone after her ordeal. Good choice. Let's go talk to Damon and Lisa. As they made their way to the rear galley, Natalie positioned herself to block Emily from Jerome's view. She didn't want him to see the girl moving freely through the cabin with the flight attendants. It might prompt him to create a disturbance or attempt to establish his fabricated connection more publicly. In the rear galley, Natalie quickly briefed her colleagues on the situation, keeping her voice low and calm to avoid alarming nearby passengers. The captain has arranged for law enforcement to meet the aircraft, she explained. We'll implement Child Protection Protocol Butterfly. The code name triggered immediate recognition. All United flight attendants were trained in this protocol, designed to protect vulnerable passengers while minimizing public attention that could escalate the situation. Emily will remain with me for the rest of the flight, Natalie continued. Damon, please notify our gate agents in Boston about the situation. We'll need them to locate Michael Parker before we arrive and verify his identity. Lisa, I'd like you to discreetly monitor seat 14B. If he asks about Emily, explain that she's participating in the cockpit visit program and will return to her seat for landing. We don't want him suspicious until authorities can take over. Her colleagues nodded, their expressions professional but concerned. What about before law enforcement arrives? Lisa asked quietly. If he realizes something's wrong during deplaning? Good question, Natalie acknowledged. The captain will make an announcement asking all passengers to remain seated upon arrival until further notice. Law enforcement should board before we begin deplaning. As the flight attendants dispersed to their assignments, Natalie guided Emily to a jump seat in the mid-cabin galley, close enough to monitor Jerome but out of his direct line of sight. We'll stay here until it's time to land, Natalie explained, helping Emily buckle into the flight attendant's jump seat. Then you'll need to go back to your regular seat just for landing. I'll be right across the aisle. As soon as we're on the ground, you'll come back with me, and we'll wait for the police to come on board. Does that sound okay? Emily nodded solemnly. What will happen to him? Natalie considered how to answer this complex question. The police will want to talk to him about why he was saying things that weren't true. They take the safety of children very seriously. Will I have to talk to the police too? Emily asked, her voice small. Probably, Natalie admitted. But I'll stay with you the whole time if you want. And your dad will be there too. This reassurance seemed to comfort Emily. She reopened her coloring book, selecting a green crayon to continue her artwork. As Natalie watched the girl color, a mixture of emotions swept through her. Relief that they had intercepted a potentially dangerous situation, pride in Emily's resourcefulness, and a simmering anger toward the man who had attempted to exploit the airline's unaccompanied minor program for his own disturbing purposes. In her 15 years as a flight attendant, Natalie had encountered intoxicated passengers, medical emergencies, and even a few physical altercations. But there was something particularly insidious about this situation, a calculated attempt to manipulate a child's trust that made her blood run cold. Jerome Caldwell stared at the empty seat beside him, struggling to maintain his composure. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The plan had been meticulously crafted. Identify a suitable unaccompanied minor on the Boston flight, establish rapport, build a plausible connection to the child's family, and walk off the plane together. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, they would be long gone. He had paid extra for last-minute seat selection, studying the manifest for the telltale designation that indicated an unaccompanied minor. Emily Parker had seemed perfect, old enough to communicate effectively but young enough to potentially be manipulated. He had researched her father, finding Michael Parker's LinkedIn profile with his workplace and position at Bradenton Financial clearly listed. It should have worked. He had established himself as a colleague of Michael's, planted seeds of trust, and was building toward the critical moment when he would escort Emily off the plane, bypassing the airline's security protocols through confusion and social engineering. But he had underestimated the girl's perceptiveness. And that flight attendant, Natalie, had been watching too closely from the beginning. She had created an opportunity for Emily to communicate without him present. And now his carefully constructed plan was unraveling. Jerome's mind raced through his options. He could request to use the lavatory near the forward galley, attempt to locate Emily, perhaps even create a scene claiming the airline had removed his friend's daughter without explanation. But the risk was too high. If Emily had already voiced her suspicions, such an approach would only confirm them. He could also attempt to disembark quickly upon landing, avoiding whatever complications might be waiting. But that would leave loose ends. Emily could describe him, the airline had his identification information, and hasty retreats raised suspicions. No, the safest course now was to maintain his role as a concerned business traveler. Express mild confusion about Emily's extended absence, but not excessive interest. Depict himself as an innocent bystander caught in a misunderstanding. After all, what crime had he actually committed? Conversing with a seatmate? Making a mistake about knowing her father? These were hardly arrestable offenses. He would talk his way out of this, just as he had talked his way through other close calls. There was no evidence beyond the word of a 9-year-old girl, and children were notoriously unreliable witnesses. As the plane began its initial descent toward Boston, Jerome Caldwell straightened his tie and rehearsed his expression of bewildered innocence. Whatever awaited him upon landing, he would be ready. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into Boston Logan International Airport, Captain Rivera's voice announced over the intercom. At this time, we ask all passengers to return to their assigned seats, fasten their seatbelts, and secure any loose items. Natalie helped Emily gather her coloring materials. It's time to go back to your seat for landing, she explained gently. I'll be right across the aisle in the flight attendant jump seat. You won't be alone. Emily clutched her backpack tightly. Do I have to sit next to him again? Natalie considered the options. Safety regulations required all passengers to be properly seated for landing, but Emily's well-being was equally important. Tell you what, she suggested. We'll see if Linda in the window seat would switch places with you. That way, she'll be between you and Jerome. Emily nodded gratefully. As they approached row 14, Natalie noticed Jerome watching their return with barely concealed intensity. His pleasant facade remained in place, but there was a calculating quality to his gaze that confirmed her worst suspicions. Excuse me, Ms. McPherson. Natalie addressed the businesswoman by the window, who removed her headphones with a questioning look. I wonder if you'd mind switching seats with Emily for landing? She's feeling a bit anxious and would prefer the window. Linda McPherson assessed the situation with a quick glance between Emily's tense expression and Jerome's too pleasant smile. Something in the businesswoman's eyes suggested she understood more than Natalie had explicitly stated. Of course, she agreed, gathering her belongings. I'd be happy to. Jerome's smile stiffened as the seating arrangement shifted, placing Linda as a buffer between himself and Emily. I hope you're feeling better, he said to Emily, his tone carefully modulated to express appropriate concern. I was beginning to worry when you didn't return. Emily didn't respond, keeping her eyes fixed on the window as she buckled her seatbelt. Natalie took the jump seat directly across from row 14, maintaining a clear view of all 3 passengers. We'll be landing in approximately 20 minutes, she announced professionally. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign. As she settled into her seat, Natalie caught Linda McPherson's eye. The businesswoman gave an almost imperceptible nod, a silent signal that she understood something was amiss and would help keep watch. Natalie felt a surge of gratitude for this unspoken female solidarity. The aircraft descended through scattered clouds, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the Massachusetts landscape below. Emily pressed her face to the window, visibly relieved to have the physical buffer of another adult between herself and Jerome. Natalie maintained her vigilance, observing how Jerome alternated between checking his phone and glancing at Emily with poorly concealed frustration. Whatever his plans had been, he knew they were compromised. The question now was whether he would accept defeat quietly or attempt something desperate. The plane touched down with a firm bump, reverse thrusters roaring as they decelerated along the runway. As soon as they had taxied clear, Captain Rivera's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Boston Logan International Airport. Local time is 4:45 p.m., and the temperature is 62 degrees. We have a special request from the airport authority this afternoon. Once we arrive at the gate, please remain seated until further instructions. We appreciate your patience and understanding." A few passengers grumbled at this unusual request, but most simply continued gathering their belongings in preparation for deplaning. Jerome, Natalie noticed, had gone completely still, his earlier restlessness replaced by a tense alertness. When the aircraft reached the gate and the engines powered down, Natalie unstrapped from her jump seat and approached row 14. "Emily," she said warmly, "you can come with me now. We have special procedures for our unaccompanied minors." Jerome watched this exchange with narrowed eyes, but remained silent as Emily quickly unbuckled and stepped into the aisle with her backpack. Natalie guided her toward the forward galley, away from the potential confrontation. "Is my dad here?" Emily asked quietly once they were safely out of earshot. "He should be waiting at the gate," Natalie assured her. "The gate agents are verifying his identity now." In the cockpit, Captain Rivera was speaking with air traffic control. "Yes, we have the minor secure with our lead flight attendant, standing by for law enforcement to board." Natalie positioned herself and Emily by the main cabin door, ready to greet the authorities. Through the small window, she could see several uniformed police officers approaching the jet bridge. She gave Emily's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "You're doing great," she said softly. "This will all be over soon." Emily nodded, clutching Mr. Whiskers to her chest. "I just want to see my dad." "You will," Natalie promised. "Very soon." The cabin door opened, and 3 Boston police officers stepped aboard, followed by an airline security representative. The lead officer, a tall woman with short gray hair and a commanding presence, approached Natalie. "Flight Attendant Rodriguez?" she asked quietly. Natalie nodded. "This is Emily Parker," she said, gesturing to the girl beside her. "I have the note she wrote and can provide a full statement about the passenger's behavior." The officer knelt to Emily's level. "Hello, Emily. I'm Officer Reyes. You're safe now and you've been very brave. Is it okay if I ask you a few questions while my colleagues speak with the man who was sitting next to you?" Emily glanced up at Natalie, who nodded encouragingly. "Okay," Emily agreed softly. "Can you point out which passenger was bothering you?" Officer Reyes asked. Emily turned and indicated Jerome, who was watching the police presence with growing alarm. "That's Jerome Caldwell," she said. "He's in seat 14B. Officer Reyes nodded to her colleagues, who moved purposefully down the aisle toward row 14. "Ms. Rodriguez," the officer continued, "could you please show the security representative to the flight deck? The captain will need to provide a statement as well. I'll stay with Emily." Natalie hesitated, reluctant to leave Emily after promising to stay with her. "It's okay," Emily said, surprising them both with her composure. "I'm not scared anymore." With a grateful smile, Natalie led the security representative toward the cockpit, glancing back to see Officer Reyes gently guiding Emily to a seat in the empty first-class cabin, away from the main cabin where her colleagues were now speaking with Jerome. From her position, Natalie could see the other officers standing beside row 14, speaking in low, firm voices to Jerome. His expression had shifted from calculated charm to defensive indignation. He gestured emphatically, clearly attempting to explain away his behavior as a misunderstanding. The officers remained unmoved by his protestations. One of them was discreetly examining his phone, while the other maintained a position blocking the aisle, preventing any potential attempt to approach the front of the aircraft. Meanwhile, passengers watched the scene with varying degrees of curiosity and concern. Most seemed to understand that something serious was occurring, maintaining a respectful distance and speaking in hushed tones. A few minutes later, Natalie returned to the first-class cabin, where Emily was speaking quietly with Officer Reyes. The girl looked up as Natalie approached, a small smile breaking through her serious expression. "Officer Reyes says my dad is waiting," Emily reported. "They checked his ID and everything." "That's wonderful," Natalie said, feeling a wave of relief. "Are you ready to see him?" Emily nodded eagerly, clutching her backpack and Mr. Whiskers. As they prepared to exit the aircraft, Natalie glanced back toward row 14. Jerome Caldwell was now standing in the aisle, hands behind his back. Handcuffed, Natalie realized with grim satisfaction. The officers escorted him toward the front of the plane, passengers staring openly as he passed. When Jerome saw Emily with the police officer, his facade cracked completely. His expression contorted with anger and frustration. No longer the charming businessman, but something darker and more dangerous. Emily shrank back instinctively, and Natalie stepped in front of her protectively. "You little," Jerome began, but an officer firmly guided him through the forward exit door before he could complete the thought. Once Jerome had been removed from the aircraft, Officer Reyes addressed the remaining passengers over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience and cooperation. You may now gather your belongings and proceed to deplane as normal. We apologize for any inconvenience." As passengers began to move, Natalie knelt to Emily's level. "It's time for you to go see your dad," she said gently. "He must be worried about you. Will you come too?" Emily asked, suddenly looking younger and more vulnerable. "Of course," Natalie agreed without hesitation. "I'll walk with you all the way." Together, they exited the aircraft, Emily holding tightly to Natalie's hand. As they emerged into the terminal, Natalie immediately spotted a man in a blue baseball cap pacing anxiously near the gate counter. The moment he saw Emily, his face transformed with relief. "Emily!" he called, rushing forward. "Daddy!" Emily broke away from Natalie, running toward her father. Michael Parker knelt and caught his daughter in a fierce embrace, lifting her off the ground. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "The police told me something happened on the plane." "I'm okay now," Emily assured him, her arms wrapped tightly around his neck. "Natalie helped me." Michael looked up, noticing Natalie for the first time. He set Emily down gently but kept an arm around her shoulders as he extended his hand to the flight attendant. "Thank you," he said, his gratitude evident in every syllable. "They didn't tell me much, just that there was an incident involving Emily and that a flight attendant had intervened." "Your daughter was incredibly brave," Natalie told him, shaking his hand. "And perceptive. She recognized a dangerous situation and found a way to alert us." Officer Reyes approached the group. "Mr. Parker, we'll need both you and Emily to come to our office to provide formal statements. We can explain the situation in more detail there." Michael nodded, his expression growing serious. "Of course, whatever you need." As they prepared to follow the officer, Emily turned back to Natalie. "Will I see you again?" she asked. Natalie smiled gently. "I don't know, sweetheart. I fly this route often, so maybe someday." Emily surprised her by stepping forward and giving her a quick, fierce hug. "Thank you for believing me," she whispered. The simple statement struck Natalie with unexpected force. How many children weren't believed when they reported feeling unsafe? How many adults dismissed their instincts as overreactions or imagined fears? "Always trust your feelings, Emily," Natalie said, returning the hug. "Especially when something doesn't feel right." As she watched Emily walk away hand in hand with her father, Natalie felt the adrenaline of the past hour finally beginning to ebb. The girl was safe. The system had worked. Whatever Jerome Caldwell's intentions had been, they had been thwarted by a 9-year-old's courage and a note scribbled in blue crayon. Sometimes, Natalie reflected, the smallest actions made the most profound differences. Coloring book. A moment of attention. A child's unspoken fear, recognized and addressed. She turned and walked back toward the aircraft, where her colleagues were preparing for the return flight to Atlanta. There would be reports to file, statements to make, perhaps even court appearances in the future. But for now, Natalie took comfort in the image of Emily's reunion with her father. The moment when fear gave way to safety, when a silent passenger finally found her voice. The fluorescent lights of the Boston Logan International Airport police substation cast harsh shadows across the small interview room. Emily Parker sat beside her father, Mr. Whiskers clutched tightly in her lap as Officer Reyes placed a clear evidence bag containing the coloring book on the table between them. "Emily," Officer Reyes began gently, "I know you've already told us what happened on the plane, but I'd like you to walk through it once more, if that's okay. Sometimes people remember different details when they tell a story a second time." Michael Parker placed a protective arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Is this really necessary? She's been through enough today." Officer Reyes nodded sympathetically. "I understand your concern, Mr. Parker, but the more complete Emily's account, the stronger our case against Mr. Caldwell will be. And Emily's doing great so far." Emily looked up at her father. "It's okay, Dad. I can tell it again." A mixture of pride and pain crossed Michael's face as he squeezed her shoulder encouragingly. "You're so brave, sweetie." "Whenever you're ready," Officer Reyes said, pressing the record button on a small digital device. Emily took a deep breath. "I was sitting in my seat, 14C, when the man came and sat next to me. He said his name was Jerome and asked if I was flying by myself. I didn't want to be rude, so I said yes. Then he said he thought he knew my dad." "And what happened next?" Officer Reyes prompted when Emily paused. "He asked my dad's name, and when I told him, he said they worked together at Bradenton Financial. He knew where Dad worked, and he said Dad talks about me all the time." Emily's brow furrowed. "That's when I started feeling scared, because Dad would have told me if someone from his work was going to be on my flight." Michael's grip on Emily's shoulder tightened slightly. "I absolutely would have." "Then what did he do?" Officer Reyes asked. "He kept sitting closer to me, and his arm would touch mine on the armrest. And then he showed me his phone and said Dad had texted him to help me with my bags at baggage claim because Dad was running late." Emily's voice grew more confident as she continued. "But that didn't make sense because I didn't have any checked bags, just my backpack. And Dad always meets me at the gate. That's the rule for unaccompanied minors." Officer Reyes nodded. "That was very smart of you to notice those things didn't add up. What did you do then?" "I wanted to tell someone, but he was right there beside me. Then Ms. Rodriguez, Natalie, brought me a coloring book. When Jerome went to the bathroom, I wrote a message asking for help." Emily pointed to the evidence bag. "I tried to show it to Natalie without him seeing. And that was this message here?" Officer Reyes slid the bagged coloring book closer, the blue crayon writing clearly visible. "He says he knows my dad. He doesn't. Help me, please. He keeps touching my hand." Emily nodded. "I was really scared by then. He kept making up stories and touching my hand and sitting too close." Michael closed his eyes briefly, composing himself before speaking. Did he touch you anywhere else, Emily?" "No, just my hand and arm," Emily replied. "But it felt wrong. Not like when you or Mom touch my hand." Officer Reyes made a note. "You mentioned he knew where your father worked. Did he know other things about your family?" Emily's brow furrowed in concentration. "He knew Dad works at Bradenton Financial, and he knew I was 9, and that I like to read." She paused. "Oh, and he seemed to know about me visiting Dad for the weekend, but lots of kids visit their dads on weekends." "Did he ask you any specific questions about your home in Atlanta or about your mother?" Emily thought for a moment. "He asked if it was hard having my parents live in different cities." And if I visited Dad a lot. As Emily continued recounting details of her interaction with Jerome, Michael Parker's expression grew increasingly troubled. When Officer Reyes finally turned off the recording device, he leaned forward. "Officer, what exactly are we dealing with here? Was this man trying to—" He trailed off, unable to voice his worst fears in front of his daughter. Officer Reyes understood the unspoken question. "Mr. Parker, we're still investigating, but I can tell you that Jerome Caldwell has a concerning background. When we ran his information, we discovered he's a registered sex offender in Rhode Island who was violating his parole by traveling out of state without permission." Michael's face paled. "Oh my God!" Furthermore, Officer Reyes continued, keeping her tone measured and professional despite the disturbing content, his phone contains searches for United Airlines unaccompanied minor procedures and information about your family, including social media research on both you and your ex-wife. Emily looked between the adults, sensing the gravity of their conversation, though not fully comprehending it. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked in a small voice. "No, sweetheart," Michael assured her quickly. "You did everything exactly right. You recognized that something wasn't safe, and you asked for help." Officer Reyes nodded in agreement. "Your father's absolutely correct, Emily. In fact, what you did was exceptional. Many adults wouldn't have been as perceptive or resourceful as you were today." Emily absorbed this praise with solemn consideration. "What's going to happen to Jerome?" Officer Reyes chose her words carefully. "He's going to be in a lot of trouble. He broke several laws, including violating his parole and harassing a minor, that's you. He'll have to appear in court, and he'll likely go to jail for what he did." "Will I have to see him again?" Emily asked, her voice wavering slightly. "I hope not," Officer Reyes replied honestly. "But if the case does go to trial and you're needed to testify, we would prepare you very carefully for that. And your parents would be with you the whole time." At the mention of both parents, Michael checked his watch. Rebecca should be arriving soon. She caught the first flight she could from Atlanta after I called her. As if on cue, a soft knock came at the door. Another officer opened it to reveal a woman with shoulder-length brown hair and Emily's hazel eyes, her face etched with worry. "Mom!" Emily cried, jumping up and running to embrace her. Rebecca Parker clutched her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, my baby, are you okay? I was so scared when your father called." "I'm okay, Mom," Emily assured her. "Natalie helped me, and Dad's here, and the police caught the bad man." Rebecca looked over Emily's head at Officer Reyes and Michael, her expression demanding more information than Emily had provided. "Ms. Parker," Officer Reyes greeted her. "I'm Officer Teresa Reyes, Boston PD. We're just finishing up Emily's statement. Why don't you join us, and then we can brief you both on next steps while Emily gets some rest. She's been incredibly brave and cooperative." Rebecca nodded, keeping an arm firmly around Emily as they approached the table. The family reunion, tense, emotional, and unexpected, created a momentary tableau of protective love surrounding the young girl who had narrowly escaped a predator's manipulations. In another room of the same police facility, Natalie Rodriguez sipped a cup of lukewarm coffee as she concluded her own statement. Detective Collins, a veteran with 23 years on the force, reviewed his notes with a grim expression. "And that's when you decided to implement your airline's child protection protocol?" he confirmed. Natalie nodded. "Yes. Once I saw Emily's written message, it was clear we needed to separate her from the passenger immediately, but without alerting him to our suspicions." "Smart move," the detective commented. "Creating a special cockpit visit as a pretext kept things calm until you could land." "It's part of our training," Natalie explained. "The butterfly protocol is specifically designed for situations involving minors at risk. We're taught to trust our instincts and act on concerning behavior, even without definitive proof." Detective Collins closed his notebook. "Well, that training paid off today. We've placed Caldwell under arrest for parole violation, but that's just the beginning. Once we complete our investigation of his phone and computer, I suspect we'll have additional charges to file." Natalie shuddered slightly, Does he have a history of this type of behavior? I'm not at liberty to share his full record, the detective replied, but I can tell you he's a registered level 2 sex offender with a prior conviction involving a minor. He was prohibited from any unsupervised contact with children under 16. The revelation confirmed Natalie's worst suspicions. Her stomach clenched as she imagined what might have happened if Emily hadn't been so perceptive, if she hadn't noticed the girl's distress, if the coloring book hadn't provided a means of communication. Will Emily need to testify if this goes to trial? She asked. Possibly, Detective Collins acknowledged, though we'll do everything we can to spare her that experience. Your testimony and the evidence from Caldwell's phone may be sufficient. His parole violation alone will send him back to prison, regardless of what happens with the new charges. Natalie nodded, relieved that at minimum, Jerome Caldwell would be off the streets for the immediate future. Is there anything else you need from me? She asked, glancing at her watch. She had been due to work the return flight to Atlanta, but another flight attendant had taken her place so she could remain in Boston to give her statement. I think we're good for now, Detective Collins said, standing. We have your contact information if we need additional details. You'll likely be called to testify if the case goes to trial. I'll be there, Natalie assured him without hesitation. As the detective escorted her from the interview room, they passed the open door of a nearby office. Inside, Natalie glimpsed Emily sitting between her parents. The three of them huddled together in conversation. The sight brought a rush of emotion, relief that the family was reunited, pride in Emily's courage, and a lingering anger toward the man who had targeted her. Emily looked up at that moment and spotted Natalie in the doorway. Her face brightened immediately. Natalie, she called. You're still here. Detective Collins paused, allowing Natalie to step into the office. I was just finishing my statement, Natalie explained, smiling at the girl. I wanted to make sure the police had all the information they needed to keep that man from bothering anyone else. Rebecca Parker stood and approached Natalie, eyes brimming with tears. I don't know how to thank you, she said, voice thick with emotion. If you hadn't noticed something was wrong. Emily did the hard part, Natalie replied honestly. She recognized the danger and found a way to communicate it. That's remarkable for a child her age. Michael joined them, extending his hand to Natalie. Still, your attentiveness made all the difference. We've already spoken with your supervisor at United to commend your actions. They mentioned something about an award for exceptional service. Natalie shook her head modestly. That's not necessary. I was just doing my job. No, Rebecca insisted. You went above and beyond. Most people would have dismissed a child's discomfort or attributed it to normal travel anxiety. You saw something deeper. Emily approached, slipping her hand into Natalie's. Can I show you something? She asked. Of course, Natalie replied, allowing herself to be led to the table where Emily's backpack lay open. The girl reached inside and carefully extracted a folded piece of paper from the coloring book that wasn't in the evidence bag. I made this for you, Emily said, unfolding the paper to reveal a crayon drawing of a flight attendant with dark hair standing beside a smaller figure with a purple backpack. Above them, in careful block letters, were the words, My hero. Natalie's throat tightened with emotion. Oh, Emily, she managed, kneeling to the girl's level. This is beautiful. Thank you. Emily's expression turned solemn. Mom says heroes are people who help others even when it's hard or scary. That's what you did for me. You know, Natalie said gently, there are different kinds of heroes. Some run into burning buildings or catch bad guys. But some heroes are just ordinary people who speak up when something's wrong, even when they're afraid. That's the kind of hero you were today. Emily considered this perspective, tilting her head thoughtfully. I guess we were both heroes then. Natalie smiled, accepting the drawing with genuine gratitude. I guess we were. As Natalie prepared to leave, Detective Collins approached with a business card. One more thing, Ms. Rodriguez. The FBI has a task force on crimes against children during transportation. They're very interested in this case and might contact you for additional information. Your actions today exemplify the kind of vigilance they're trying to promote across the transportation industry. Natalie accepted the card, nodding soberly. I'd be happy to help in any way I can. No child should ever experience what Emily went through today. With final goodbyes to the Parker family and promises to stay in touch, Natalie departed the police station. Outside, the autumn evening had settled over Boston, streetlights glowing in the gathering dusk. She paused on the steps, Emily's drawing still in her hand, and took a deep breath of the cool air. The emotional weight of the day's events suddenly pressed down on her. How close they had come to tragedy. How differently things might have ended without Emily's resourcefulness and her own attention to the subtle signs of distress. Her phone buzzed with a message from her supervisor. The airline had booked her a hotel room for the night and rescheduled her on tomorrow morning's flight back to Atlanta. The gesture was appreciated. Natalie felt the adrenaline crash beginning to hit her system, exhaustion seeping into her bones. As she hailed a taxi to the hotel, Natalie carefully tucked Emily's drawing into her flight bag, a tangible reminder that sometimes the most important work of her job had nothing to do with serving beverages or demonstrating safety procedures. Sometimes, it was simply about noticing a child's trembling hands and asking the right questions. 3 days later, Rebecca Parker sat on the edge of Emily's bed, stroking her daughter's hair as they completed their nightly routine. Since returning from Boston, Emily had been quieter than usual, processing the traumatic experience in her own way. The child psychologist they'd consulted had assured them this was normal and encouraged them to maintain routines while allowing Emily space to express her feelings when she was ready. "Mom," Emily said as Rebecca prepared to turn out the light, "I've been thinking about something." "What is it, sweetheart?" Rebecca asked, settling back on the bed. Emily hugged Mr. Whiskers closer. "When I was scared on the plane, I kept wondering if I was just being silly. Like, maybe Jerome really did know Dad, and I was making a big deal over nothing." Rebecca nodded encouragingly, giving Emily space to articulate her thoughts. "But then I remembered what we learned in school about trusting our feelings when something doesn't seem right," Emily continued. "Ms. Wilson calls it our inner alarm system, and my alarm was definitely going off with Jerome." "That inner alarm system is very important," Rebecca agreed. "It's like a superpower that helps keep us safe." Emily considered this. But what if my alarm had been wrong? What if Jerome really was just trying to be nice, and I got him in trouble for no reason? Rebecca recognized the concern underlying Emily's question, the fear of having misjudged the situation, of having caused trouble unnecessarily. It was a fear that kept too many people, especially women and children, from speaking up when they sensed danger. "Emily, listen to me," Rebecca said firmly. "You did exactly the right thing. Even if Jerome had turned out to be harmless, it's always better to get help when you feel unsafe. Always. The worst that would have happened is that there would have been a misunderstanding that could be cleared up. But the alternative, not getting help when you're really in danger, is much, much worse." Emily nodded slowly, absorbing her mother's words. "The police officer said he was a bad man who had hurt kids before. Is that true?" Rebecca hesitated, weighing how much to share. The psychologist had advised honesty, but age-appropriate honesty. "Yes, it is true. He had done bad things before, which is why he wasn't supposed to be traveling or talking to children at all. By telling Natalie you were scared, you helped make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. So I really did the right thing?" "You did the absolute right thing," Rebecca affirmed. "And I am so proud of you. Dad is too." Emily was quiet for a moment, processing this validation. Then she asked, "When do I fly to see Dad again?" The question caught Rebecca off guard. After the traumatic experience, she had assumed Emily would be reluctant to fly, especially as an unaccompanied minor. She and Michael had already discussed driving options for the next visitation weekend. "Well," Rebecca began carefully, "Dad and I thought maybe he could drive down next time, or I could drive you up to Boston. We thought you might not want to fly again so soon." Emily shook her head decisively. "I want to fly. I'm not going to let one bad thing stop me from seeing Dad the regular way." Rebecca felt a surge of pride at her daughter's resilience. "Are you sure? It's completely okay if you're nervous about flying again. I am a little nervous, Emily admitted. But Natalie said United is changing their rules for unaccompanied minors because of what happened to me. She said they're going to be even more careful now about who sits next to kids traveling alone. Rebecca made a mental note to follow up on this information. She hadn't heard about policy changes yet, but it would be reassuring to know the airline was addressing the security gap that Jerome had exploited. If you really want to fly next time, we can make that happen, Rebecca assured her. And we'll make sure the airline knows how special you are and how brave you've been. Emily yawned, the day's emotional processing taking its toll. Mom, will you lay with me until I fall asleep? Of course, sweetheart. Rebecca stretched out beside her daughter, pulling the covers over them both. As Emily's breathing gradually slowed and deepened, Rebecca found herself reflecting on the fine line between protecting children and empowering them. She had always taught Emily about stranger danger and bodily autonomy, but until now, those lessons had remained theoretical. Emily's experience had transformed those abstract concepts into lived reality, a harsh initiation into the vigilance that safety required in an imperfect world. The psychologist had emphasized focusing on the positive aspects of the experience. Emily's perceptiveness, her courage in asking for help, the effective response from the flight attendant and authorities. These were the elements that would help Emily process the trauma without developing unhealthy fears or anxiety. As Emily drifted into sleep, still clutching Mr. Whiskers, Rebecca gently brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. There would be more conversations in the days ahead, more processing of the experience. But for now, Emily was safe, resilient, and, remarkably, unbroken by her brush with danger. Jerome Caldwell sat in the sparse visitation room of the Suffolk County Jail, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the business attire he'd worn on the flight. Across the table, his court-appointed attorney reviewed the mounting evidence against him with growing concern. "They've completed the forensic analysis of your phone," Attorney Martin said, adjusting his glasses as he scanned the report. "It's problematic, Mr. Caldwell. Very problematic." Jerome maintained his facade of indignation. "I've done nothing wrong. This is all a massive overreaction to a simple misunderstanding. I was being friendly to a child seated next to me on an airplane. Since when is that a crime?" Martin set down the report and fixed his client with a stern gaze. "Let's be clear about what we're dealing with. Your phone contains searches for how to approach children traveling alone and United Airlines unaccompanied minor procedures. You researched Michael Parker's family extensively, including maps to their home in Atlanta. You specifically requested a seat assignment next to Emily after identifying her as an unaccompanied minor on the flight manifest, which you shouldn't have had access to in the first place." Jerome's expression remained defiant, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Furthermore," Martin continued, "you were in violation of your parole by traveling outside Rhode Island without permission. You've been charged with attempting to interfere with custodial rights, harassment of a minor, parole violation, and attempted child abduction. The FBI is now involved because this crossed state lines." "This is absurd," Jerome protested. "I never touched that girl inappropriately. I never threatened her. All I did was make conversation." Martin sighed, closing the folder. "Mr. Caldwell, the evidence of premeditation is overwhelming. Your internet search history alone paints a clear picture of your intentions. And given your prior conviction—" "That was a misunderstanding too," Jerome interrupted. "I've been unfairly labeled." "Stop," Martin said firmly. "I'm your attorney, and I can't help you if you're not honest with me. Your previous conviction was not a misunderstanding. You pled guilty to charges of luring a minor and inappropriate contact. The court showed leniency then, which is why you were on parole rather than serving your full sentence." Jerome fell silent, his carefully constructed facade beginning to crack under the weight of the evidence. "The prosecution is offering a plea deal," Martin continued. "They're willing to drop the attempted abduction charge if you plead guilty to the parole violation and harassment charges. You'd serve a minimum of 5 years, with mandatory psychological treatment. And if I don't take the deal, they'll pursue all charges, including the attempted abduction, which carries a potential 20-year sentence. And they feel confident in their case, especially with the flight attendant's testimony and the evidence from your phone. Jerome's shoulders slumped slightly, the first genuine reaction he'd shown since his arrest. What about the girl? Will she testify? They're hoping to spare her that, Martin replied. But her written note has already been entered as evidence, and her initial statement to police is compelling. Frankly, Mr. Caldwell, 9-year-olds make very sympathetic witnesses, especially articulate ones like Emily Parker. If this goes to trial and she takes the stand, you can expect the maximum sentence. The mention of Emily's name triggered a flash of anger in Jerome's eyes. That flight attendant had no right to interfere. Everything was under control until she started hovering around us. Martin studied his client with growing distaste. In his 20 years as a public defender, he had represented many accused criminals, maintaining the professional belief that everyone deserved a fair defense regardless of their alleged crimes. But cases involving children tested that professional distance, especially when his clients showed more anger at being caught than remorse for their actions. Ms. Rodriguez was doing her job, Martin said coolly, protecting a vulnerable passenger who was clearly in distress. I recommend you take the plea deal, Mr. Caldwell. It's the best outcome you can hope for given the circumstances. Jerome stared at the scuffed surface of the table, calculating his limited options. Without looking up, he muttered, "Fine, I'll take the deal." Martin nodded, making a note in his file. "I'll inform the prosecutor. They'll want a formal statement acknowledging what you did and why." "What I allegedly did," Jerome corrected automatically. Martin closed his briefcase with a definitive click. "No, Mr. Caldwell. If you're taking the plea, you need to admit what you actually did. The courts are not interested in your alleged actions at this point. They want an admission of guilt and a demonstration of remorse, whether you feel it or not." As the attorney gathered his papers to leave, Jerome finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind since his arrest. "What happens to the girl now?" Martin paused, studying his client's expression for any sign of genuine concern. Finding none, he replied simply, "Emily Parker goes home to her family and tries to recover from the trauma of being targeted by a predator. She returns to the normal life of a 9-year-old, which you attempted to disrupt. With proper support, children are remarkably resilient. I expect she'll be fine, no thanks to you." With that, Martin signaled to the guard that the consultation was over, leaving Jerome alone with the consequences of his thwarted plan. 2 weeks after the incident, United Airlines headquarters in Chicago hosted a special recognition ceremony for Natalie Rodriguez. The company's CEO, senior leadership team, and representatives from the Flight Attendants Union gathered to present her with the Excellence in Passenger Safety Award, the highest honor the airline bestowed on its crew members. Natalie stood somewhat uncomfortably in the spotlight as the CEO recounted her actions aboard Flight 2487, emphasizing her attentiveness, quick thinking, and adherence to safety protocols. Flight Attendant Rodriguez exemplifies our core values of vigilance, compassion, and professionalism, he concluded. Her actions not only protected a vulnerable passenger, but have also led to enhanced safety protocols for our unaccompanied minor program. Thanks to her experience and recommendations, we've implemented new seating policies to ensure that unaccompanied minors are never seated next to unknown adult male passengers and are always placed in rows with greater crew visibility. Applause filled the room as Natalie accepted the glass trophy and stepped to the podium. "Thank you," she began. "But I want to emphasize that I wasn't the only hero that day. 9-year-old Emily Parker displayed remarkable courage and presence of mind in a frightening situation. Without her initiative in writing that note, the outcome could have been very different." Natalie paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "This experience has reinforced what I've always believed about our role as flight attendants. Yes, we serve drinks and demonstrate safety features, but at our core, we are guardians. Every day, parents entrust their children to our care, whether those children are traveling alone or with family. It's a responsibility I've never taken lightly, but one I feel even more profoundly now." She glanced at the prepared remarks she'd been given by the PR department, then set them aside. I'd like to suggest that instead of focusing on my individual actions, we use this moment to enhance our collective commitment to protecting all passengers, especially the most vulnerable. The new seating policies are an excellent start, but we can do more. Enhance training for all crew members in recognizing signs of distress or manipulation. Better coordination with airport security and law enforcement. And most importantly, a culture that encourages every employee to trust their instincts when something doesn't seem right. The CEO nodded approvingly as Natalie concluded her remarks. The ceremony transitioned to a reception, where Natalie found herself the center of attention, fielding questions and accepting congratulations from colleagues and executives alike. Amid the crowd, she noticed a familiar face approaching. Captain Rivera from Flight 2487, who had coordinated with air traffic control to arrange for law enforcement upon landing. "Natalie," he greeted her warmly. "Outstanding job with that speech. I'm pleased to see the company listening to your recommendations." "Thanks, Captain," she replied. "I hope they follow through on implementation. Those new seating policies could make a real difference." "They already have," he assured her. "I flew Boston to Atlanta last week with 2 UMs on board. Both were seated in the first row of their respective cabins, directly in the flight attendant's line of sight. And the system automatically blocked any adult males from being assigned adjacent seats." Natalie felt a surge of satisfaction knowing that tangible changes had already been implemented. "That's excellent news. Has there been any update on the Caldwell case?" "I heard he took a plea deal," Captain Rivera said, lowering his voice. 5 to 7 years, from what my contact at Logan Security told me. Emily won't have to testify." "Thank goodness for that," Natalie said with genuine relief. The thought of Emily facing her would-be abductor in court had weighed heavily on her mind. As the reception continued, Natalie's phone buzzed with an incoming email. Excusing herself momentarily, she checked the message and found herself smiling at the screen. It was from Rebecca Parker, with the subject line, "A flight attendant in training?" The email contained a photo of Emily in her bedroom, which she had apparently redecorated with a travel theme. A United Airlines poster adorned one wall, and Emily stood proudly in a makeshift uniform, a blue blazer and a scarf tied in a perfect flight attendant knot. The accompanying message read, "Natalie, Emily wanted me to send you this photo of her career day outfit for school tomorrow. When asked what she wants to be when she grows up, she now has a very specific answer. A flight attendant who helps people feel safe. Her experience could have left her afraid of flying or distrustful of others. Instead, thanks to you, it has inspired her. The airline informed us of the policy changes being implemented because of what happened. It brings us comfort knowing that Emily's experience will help protect other children traveling alone. We'll be forever grateful for your vigilance and kindness. Emily flies to Boston again next month with the new seating arrangements, and she's hoping she might see you on a future flight. With deepest thanks, Rebecca Parker." Natalie read the message twice, warmth spreading through her chest at the image of Emily in her improvised uniform. The girl's resilience was remarkable, transforming a frightening experience into inspiration rather than fear. As she returned to the reception, fielding more congratulations and discussing potential enhancements to the UM program with airline executives, Natalie found her mind drifting to Emily's drawing, "My Hero," in careful block letters above the crayon figures. She had framed it and placed it on her bedside table, a daily reminder of the difference one person's attention could make. In her 15 years as a flight attendant, Natalie had encountered countless passengers, most of whose faces and names blurred together in her memory over time. But she knew with certainty that she would never forget the silent passenger in 14C, the 9-year-old girl whose trembling hands and written plea had set in motion a chain of events that would protect countless other children in the future. Emily Parker stood at Gate B-17 in Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, her UM lanyard displayed prominently around her neck. 6 weeks had passed since the incident with Jerome Caldwell, and today marked her first flight back to Boston to visit her father since that frightening day. Rebecca knelt beside her, adjusting Emily's backpack straps. "Are you sure you're ready for this, sweetie? Dad and I would completely understand if you wanted to wait a little longer before flying again." Emily shook her head decisively. I'm ready, Mom. United sent us all those emails about the new rules for kids traveling alone. And look, she pointed to a sign at the gate that highlighted the airline's enhanced unaccompanied minor protocols. They're being extra careful now. Rebecca followed her daughter's gaze to the sign, which outlined the revised policies. Unaccompanied minors seated in high-visibility locations, no adult males assigned to adjacent seats, increased flight attendant check-ins, and enhanced identification procedures for authorized pickup persons. Besides, Emily continued with the practical wisdom that sometimes made her seem older than her 9 years. If I don't fly again soon, I might get too scared to ever do it. That's what Dr. Melissa says about facing our fears. Rebecca smiled at the reference to Emily's therapist, who had been working with her to process the traumatic experience. Dr. Melissa is very smart, she agreed. And so are you. The gate agent approached with a tablet in hand. Emily Parker, we're ready to begin our unaccompanied minor boarding process. Emily took a deep breath, her expression a mixture of determination and lingering anxiety. That's me. The agent smiled warmly. Perfect. We have you in seat 4C today, right where our flight attendants can see you at all times. And I've personally verified that the passengers in 4A and 4B are a grandmother and her granddaughter. Would you like to meet them before boarding? The thoughtful offer, clearly part of the airline's new approach, visibly eased some of Emily's tension. Yes, please. As the agent introduced Emily to her row companions, a friendly woman in her 70s and a 12-year-old girl named Zoe who was reading the same book series Emily loved, Rebecca watched with a mixture of pride and wistfulness. Her daughter was growing up, learning difficult lessons about the world's dangers but also about her own strength. When it was time to board, Emily hugged her mother tightly. I love you to the moon, Rebecca whispered, completing their ritual. And back twice, Emily replied, squeezing harder before pulling away. Call me as soon as you land, Rebecca reminded her. And say hi to Dad for me. Emily nodded, then turned to follow the gate agent down the jet bridge. At the entrance to the aircraft, she paused and looked back, giving her mother a brave smile and a thumbs up. Rebecca returned the gesture, maintaining her own smile until Emily disappeared into the plane. Only then did she allow her expression to falter, a mixture of anxiety and trust washing over her. Letting go was never easy, especially after coming so close to tragedy. But Emily needed to reclaim her independence, to know that one frightening experience wouldn't define her life. Aboard the aircraft, Emily settled into her seat beside Zoe, who immediately struck up a conversation about their shared taste in books. The flight attendant assigned to their section approached with a warm smile. Hello, Emily, she said, checking the information on her tablet. I'm Diane. I'll be taking care of you during our flight to Boston today. Emily looked up hopefully. Is Natalie working today? Natalie Rodriguez. Diane shook her head. I'm afraid not. Do you know Natalie? She helped me on my last flight, Emily explained. She noticed I was scared and gave me a coloring book. That's how I told her I needed help. Diane's expression shifted with recognition. You're that Emily? The one who wrote the note in crayon. Emily nodded, suddenly self-conscious as Zoe looked at her with newfound curiosity. Well, Diane said, her voice warm with admiration. You're quite famous among flight attendants now. Natalie's story about your bravery has become part of our training. In fact, she reached into her pocket and extracted a small pin in the shape of a butterfly. This is our new symbol for the Child Protection Protocol. It was inspired by you. Emily accepted the pin with wide eyes, turning it over in her palm. Really? Because of me? Because of you, Diane confirmed. You showed us how important it is to give children a way to communicate when they're feeling unsafe. Now every flight attendant in our airline carries coloring books and other writing materials for our young passengers. It's called the Butterfly Protocol. Emily carefully pinned the butterfly to her backpack, a visible reminder that her experience had created positive change. Thank you. No, Emily. Thank you, Diane replied. Now, is there anything you need before takeoff? I'm okay right now, Emily assured her, feeling genuinely comfortable for the first time since boarding. As the flight prepared for departure, Emily gazed out the window at the Atlanta tarmac, Mr. Whiskers tucked securely beside her. The fear she had anticipated didn't materialize. Not completely, anyway. There was still a flutter of anxiety in her stomach, but it was manageable, cushioned by the knowledge that she was surrounded by people who understood her past experience and were committed to her safety. Zoe leaned over, gesturing toward the butterfly pin. "So what's the story? Why are you famous with flight attendants?" Emily hesitated, unsure how much to share with a stranger. But there was something about Zoe's straightforward curiosity that felt reassuring rather than intrusive. "On my last flight, a man sat next to me and pretended to know my dad," she explained simply. "He was lying and trying to scare me. The flight attendant, Natalie, noticed I was afraid and gave me a coloring book. I wrote her a message asking for help, and she made sure I was safe." Zoe's eyes widened. "Whoa, that's both scary and cool. I mean, not cool that it happened, but cool that you figured out what to do." "I guess," Emily agreed, surprised by how matter-of-fact the story sounded when she told it this way. A simple accounting of events without the emotional weight of fear that had accompanied the actual experience. "My mom says we should always trust our instincts," Zoe offered. "Like if something feels wrong, it probably is." "That's what my mom says too," Emily replied, feeling an unexpected connection with her seatmate. "And now I know it's really true." As the plane accelerated down the runway, Emily felt a different kind of butterfly sensation in her stomach. Not just from the physical sensation of takeoff, but from the realization that she was reclaiming this experience. Flying had once been an adventure, then briefly a source of fear, and now it was becoming an adventure again. She clutched Mr. Whiskers as the aircraft lifted into the air, leaving Atlanta behind. Her fingers traced the outline of the butterfly pin on her backpack. A small metal reminder that sometimes, from the most frightening experiences, something beautiful could emerge. 3 months later, Natalie Rodriguez stood in the crowded arrivals area of Boston Logan International Airport, scanning the faces of deplaning passengers. She wasn't working today. Her presence was for a more personal reason. The email from Rebecca Parker had arrived a week earlier, informing her that Emily had completed her therapy program and was going to receive a special bravery award from the Boston Children's Safety Coalition. The ceremony was scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, and Emily had specifically asked if Natalie could attend. United Airlines had not only approved Natalie's request for time off, but had also covered her flight to Boston, recognizing the positive publicity generated by Emily's story and Natalie's role in implementing the enhanced UN protocols that now carried the butterfly symbol. As passengers from the Atlanta flight streamed into the terminal, Natalie finally spotted them. Emily walking between her parents, animatedly describing something with expansive hand gestures. The girl wore her purple backpack, now adorned with several pins including the butterfly symbol that had become the emblem of United's Child Protection Initiative. "Natalie," Emily called out, breaking into a run when she spotted the flight attendant. She threw her arms around Natalie's waist in an enthusiastic hug. "You came." "Of course I came," Natalie replied, returning the embrace. "I wouldn't miss your big day." Michael and Rebecca approached more sedately, both smiling at their daughter's excitement. "Thank you for making this trip," Rebecca said warmly. "It means the world to Emily. She talks about you all the time." "How was your flight?" Natalie asked Emily, noting how much more animated and confident the girl appeared compared to their last encounter. "It was great," Emily enthused. "I sat next to a pilot who was traveling to Boston for vacation, and he showed me pictures of the cockpit and explained how all the instruments work. And guess what? I didn't feel scared at all." The simple statement carried profound significance. Evidence of healing, of reclaimed joy, of fear conquered rather than surrendered to. "That's wonderful," Natalie said sincerely. "Show her your speech," Michael encouraged, placing a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. Emily unzipped her backpack and carefully extracted a folded piece of paper. "I have to give a speech at the ceremony tomorrow," she explained. "Dad helped me write it, but the ideas are all mine. Do you want to see?" "I'd be honored," Natalie replied, accepting the paper. As she unfolded it, Her eyes caught the title written in Emily's careful handwriting. How a Coloring Book Saved Me. Below it, the speech began. Sometimes the scariest moments can teach us the most important lessons. Last October, I learned that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of courage. Natalie looked up from the paper to find Emily watching her expectantly. This is beautiful, Emily. I'm so proud of you for sharing your story to help other kids. Emily beamed at the praise. The children's safety people said my story might help other kids know it's okay to speak up when they feel unsafe. And guess what else? United Airlines is going to give every unaccompanied minor a special coloring book now with information about safe adults and how to ask for help if they need it. The butterfly effect of that single blue crayon message had rippled outward, touching countless lives and creating tangible change in airline procedures. One child's courage, one flight attendant's attentiveness, one simple coloring book. Together, they had made a difference that would continue to protect vulnerable young travelers for years to come. As they left the terminal together, Natalie noticed Emily's butterfly pin catching the afternoon sunlight. From tragedy narrowly averted had emerged something beautiful and enduring. A symbol of transformation, of resilience, and of the profound courage it takes to speak up when something isn't right. Emily Parker had boarded Flight 2487 as a silent, frightened passenger. She had emerged as a voice for change, her trembling hands now steady, her silent fear transformed into eloquent advocacy. And in that transformation lay the most powerful message of all. That even the smallest among us have the power to create ripples of change when they find the courage to make their voices heard. 2 years later, Emily Parker stood taller now at 11 years old, her familiar purple backpack replaced by a sleek navy one adorned with travel stickers and, prominently displayed, the butterfly pin that had become so significant in her life. She moved through Boston Logan International Airport with the confidence of a seasoned traveler, her lanyard now a badge of pride rather than a source of anxiety. Flight 1842 to Atlanta is now boarding unaccompanied minors and passengers needing special assistance, announced the gate agent. That's me, Emily said, turning to her father. Their weekend together had been filled with museums, a Red Sox game, and plenty of quality time that had become increasingly precious as Emily grew older. Michael Parker knelt to give his daughter a hug. Call me when you land. Okay? Mom will be waiting at the gate. I know the drill, Dad, Emily replied with an affectionate eye roll that hinted at her approaching teenage years. The gate agent approached with a tablet. Emily Parker, we're ready for you to board. Emily gave her father one final squeeze before stepping toward the gate. Love you, Dad. Love you too, sweetheart. To the moon, and back twice, she finished automatically. The familiar exchange now a comforting ritual that bridged the geographical distance between them. As Emily walked down the jet bridge, she felt none of the trepidation that had once accompanied these journeys. The events of that October day 2 years ago had transformed her in ways she was still discovering, making her more observant, more confident, and more determined to help others. The flight attendant waiting at the aircraft door greeted her warmly. Hello, Emily. Heading home to Atlanta today? Yes, Emily confirmed, noting the butterfly pin on the woman's uniform, the universal symbol adopted by multiple airlines following United's implementation of enhanced protocols. You're in seat 5A today, the flight attendant explained, guiding her toward the front of the plane. Window seat with a great view. Emily settled into her seat, immediately noticing the girl across the aisle. Another about 7 years old, clutching a stuffed rabbit and looking terrified. The coloring book on her tray table remained untouched, her eyes wide with anxiety. Without hesitation, Emily leaned across the aisle. Hi, I'm Emily. Is this your first time flying alone? The younger girl nodded silently. I was scared my first time too, Emily confided. Actually, my third time was pretty scary as well, but it gets easier. What's your name? Lily, the girl whispered. That's a pretty name. And who's your rabbit friend? Hoppy, Lily replied, her grip on the stuffed animal loosening slightly. Hoppy looks like a good travel buddy, Emily said. I used to bring my cat, Mr. Whiskers, on every flight. Lily's eyes widened with interest. You did? Absolutely. Look, I'll show you something cool. Emily pointed toward the window. When we take off, the houses below will look like tiny toys. And if you're worried about anything, see that butterfly pin on the flight attendant's uniform? That means they're specially trained to help kids like us. The flight attendant, observing this interaction, smiled appreciatively at Emily before continuing her preparations. As the plane began to taxi, Emily continued chatting with Lily, sharing tips for making flights more enjoyable and gradually drawing the younger girl out of her shell. By the time they reached cruising altitude, Lily was coloring contentedly, her initial fear replaced by curiosity about the clouds outside her window. Emily turned her attention to her own window, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The butterfly symbol that had emerged from her frightening experience now protected thousands of children traveling alone. Jerome Caldwell remained in prison, unable to harm any other children, and she had discovered her own voice, not just to ask for help when needed, but to offer it to others. Last month, she had given a presentation at her school about travel safety, sharing age-appropriate aspects of her experience and the butterfly pins she had helped design for the school's safety program. The school counselor had called her a natural peer educator, a term Emily had proudly repeated to her parents. For her 11th birthday, her mother had gifted her a journal embossed with a silver butterfly, a place to record her thoughts and experiences. On the first page, Emily had written, "Being brave doesn't mean you're never afraid. It means doing the right thing even when you are afraid." As the aircraft soared over the patchwork landscape below, Emily noticed Lily looking anxious again during a patch of turbulence. Without hesitation, she reached across the aisle and offered her hand. The younger girl took it gratefully, holding tight until the bumpy air subsided. "It's just air pockets," Emily explained, "like bumps in a road but for airplanes. Nothing to worry about." Lily nodded, visibly reassured by both the explanation and Emily's calm demeanor. In that moment, Emily understood with perfect clarity the invisible thread that connected her past to her present. How being helped had empowered her to help others. How fear confronted had transformed into courage shared. The flight attendant passed by, giving Emily an appreciative nod at her natural mentoring of the younger traveler. "Everything okay here, ladies?" "We're great," Emily replied confidently, the butterfly pin on her backpack catching the sunlight streaming through the window. The simple symbol represented everything she had learned from that terrifying flight 2 years ago. That danger could be overcome with courage, that speaking up could create positive change, and that even the smallest voices deserve to be heard. As the plane began its descent toward Atlanta, Emily felt the familiar flutter in her stomach, no longer from fear, but from the satisfaction of coming full circle. Once a frightened child helped by a stranger's kindness, she had become the helper, the protector, the one who noticed when something wasn't right. The silent passenger had found her voice, and she would never be silent again. Natalie Rodriguez scanned the passenger manifest for her Atlanta to Boston flight, pausing when she noticed a familiar name, Emily Parker. After 2 years and hundreds of flights, she still thought often of the girl whose courage had transformed airline safety protocols. They had kept in touch through occasional emails and the annual Christmas card from the Parker family, but it had been months since their last direct contact. Natalie looked forward to seeing how Emily had grown and hearing about her latest adventures. As passengers boarded, Natalie positioned herself near the aircraft door, watching for Emily among the stream of travelers. When the girl appeared, taller, more confident, but with the same thoughtful hazel eyes, Natalie felt a surge of pride. "Emily Parker," she greeted warmly. "What a wonderful surprise." Emily's face lit up with recognition. "Natalie, I hoped you might be on this flight." They exchanged a quick hug before Natalie continued her boarding duties, promising to catch up properly once the flight was underway. Later, as the cabin cruised at 30,000 feet, Natalie took her break in the empty seat beside Emily. "So, how have you been?" she asked. "Your mom mentioned in her last email that you've become quite the public speaker." Emily nodded enthusiastically. "I've been talking to kids at schools about safety and trusting their instincts. And guess what? Boston Children's Hospital invited me to speak to their child psychology residents about how to help kids after scary experiences. That's incredible, Natalie said sincerely. I couldn't have done any of it without you, Emily said. You believed me when I was too scared to speak. You did the hard part, Natalie corrected gently. You recognized danger and found a way to communicate it. That took real courage. They chatted easily about Emily's school, her continued therapy work that had evolved into peer counseling training, and her growing interest in psychology. I think I might want to be a child psychologist when I grow up, Emily confided. Or maybe work with airlines on their safety procedures. Or both. Natalie smiled at the girl's ambition. Whatever you choose, you'll be excellent. You already have more insight than many adults I know. As Natalie prepared to return to her duties, Emily reached into her backpack and pulled out a small gift box. I've been carrying this for months, hoping I'd see you on one of my flights. Curious, Natalie opened the box to find a custom-made pin, similar to the standard butterfly emblem, but this one crafted from blue enamel, the exact shade of crayon Emily had used for her note. It's to remember, Emily explained simply. The airline has the butterfly symbol now, but this one is just for you, the original. Touched beyond words, Natalie carefully pinned it to her uniform, next to her wings. I'll wear it on every flight, she promised. As she moved through the cabin continuing her service duties, Natalie's hand occasionally brushed the blue butterfly pin, a small, tangible reminder that sometimes the most important part of her job had nothing to do with beverage service or safety demonstrations. Sometimes, it was simply about noticing a child's trembling hands and providing a means for their unspoken fears to be heard. The silent passenger had not only found her voice but had ensured that others would find theirs as well. A lasting legacy born from blue crayon words on a simple coloring book page.